Thank you very much, Mr. Lydon. Happy Sabbath, everyone. Hope everyone had a good week. It was funny, Mr. Lydon was mentioning that we're already a month through January here, and my wife and I were just speaking about on the way over, on our drive over, that feels like it's been a long time since we went to winter camp even, and that was only, winter camp ended the end of December, beginning of January. I think we left January 1st or something, and it's seemed like it's been a long time since then. I don't know how y'all's January has felt, but for us it's felt a little bit long in some respects. But from winter camp, and as we both prepared to go off to winter camp, we were both, Jenny and I, since we were both serving as staff at winter camp, had been reflecting on the camp theme this year, which was the theme of courage under fire, which, as I was thinking about the other day, would actually just be a good theme for every camp from now until Christ returns, because I think it's something that we really need to focus on and really need to keep in mind, especially for the youth in the church, as we draw closer and closer towards the tribulation and when Christ returns. And one thing that I kept thinking about when reflecting on this theme was that of actual warfare. Now, while most civilians likely use the phrase under fire or courage under fire in a metaphorical sense, it is a phrase that originated from the idea of being within the shooting range of armed enemy forces. Now, being shot at, as I imagine, is a very frightening thing, as I can only imagine. But yet soldiers in a war are constantly faced with these sorts of life-threatening situations. But yet, in order to succeed in their goal and win the battle, they must have courage under that fire. Now, I'm sure that over time we've all heard various definitions of the word courage, but one definition is the mental or moral strength to venture, persevere, and withstand danger, fear, or difficulty. The phrase courage under fire can therefore be interpreted literally as the courage to face enemy fire, or metaphorically be defined as the courage to face extremely strong adversity, to persevere and withstand great danger, fear, or trials. Now, it's very clear that in order to enter a physical combat zone, a soldier has to be very well prepared and have great physical and mental fortitude, so that the soldier can overcome as I imagine, a very natural human instinct of turning around 180 degrees and running in the opposite direction. But a soldier is going to need more than just good equipment and good training, more than just boot camp, and more than just that physical and mental training in order to win a war. In order for a soldier to help fight and win a war, that soldier is going to need other soldiers, right? A soldier alone isn't going to win a war. No matter how much that soldier believes in their own abilities, they cannot possibly have enough mental or moral strength to overcome an entire opposing enemy force. A soldier alone can only develop so much courage. In addition, they will also need to build courage as part of a larger unit, so they can all build courage that they will need to together withstand that enemy, together as a whole. You may have heard of the term morale, or to be fancy, esprit de corps, meaning the spirit of the body in French, applied to the military before. Historical military writers have taken different approaches to defining morale, with some of them sort of being deliberately vague. But a sociologist by the name of Alexander Leighton described morale as, quote, the capacity of a group of people to pull together persistently and consistently in pursuit of a common purpose. In other words, there is a kind of courage, a kind of mental strength that soldiers have to create together in order to face a large battle. As otherwise, the strength that each individual soldier has developed isn't going to be enough. It is the kind of courage that not only says that I can do it, but that we can do it. In the words of an unnamed American general, this kind of courage is the one that says, when a soldier thinks his army is the best in the world, his regiment is the best in the army, his company is the best in the regiment, his squad is the best in the company, and that he himself is the best soldier man in the outfit. Soldiers need this kind of courage, built collectively, in addition to their own individual courage to succeed, as only then can they overcome the fear of facing a large enemy force with all guns pointed in their direction. As we are more than well aware of, we all face spiritual battles throughout our lives, as Paul writes in Ephesians 6 and verse 12. We fight these individual spiritual battles based on our own strength, as Satan is tempting each one of us individually into sin, and we each have to rise above these temptations and continue to follow God. But God has not called us just to be individuals. I mean, you can turn to your left and turn to your right and turn backwards here, and you can realize that God has not called us just to be alone. God has called us to be a family. But why are we called to be this family? Why do we all need to work together as parts of a body in order to accomplish this common goal? Why does God want us to work together? Well, if you turn over with me to Hebrews 10, we'll read verses 24 and 25. We will be told what some of our responsibilities are as this spiritual family, which gives us some insight as to why God calls us to be together. And actually here, I want to read from the New Living Version, or New International Version, as I like the wording here, as I think it's made a little bit clearer. So Hebrews 10 and verse 24. And let us consider how we may spur one another on towards love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. Exhorting, meaning to encourage one another, as it's originally written in the New King James Version. By being together and meeting with one another, we can encourage each other. And encourage, literally meaning to give one another courage, the courage that we need to grow and to do good spiritual works. Now, of course, while we can't neglect our own individual spiritual growth, God emphasizes that we need to also grow together, as there is some strength, some courage that we need each other in order to develop. So what are some unique ways of spiritual growth that we can only achieve by working together? What are some of the ways that we can work together as a church organization as a whole, or as a congregation, or as individual members to become strong and build courage? Or in other words, to build our spiritual morale. Now, I have by no means an exhaustive list, but there are two different ways that we can work together to build courage that I've been thinking about and that I think are particularly relevant to us as a church congregation moving forward. So the first way that we can build strength is by learning from each other's examples of practical Christian living in modern times. Now, over time, we've discussed a lot of examples of living with courage under fire, and at winter camp, we in particular discussed a lot of different biblical examples, with every dorm at the camp having a different dorm character from the Bible, and all the different compass checks they gave, also talking about different biblical characters. And these examples serve to help us build faith and courage, but we can also learn from fellow brethren in this day and age as well. And these modern examples can help us see how we can similarly apply the lessons from the Scriptures to live our lives as Christians in the 21st century. Now, the writer of Hebrews, also traditionally believed to be the Apostle Paul, encourages us by reminding us that we have great examples of spiritual courage to examine and learn from. And I'll turn over to Hebrews 12 and verse 1 here. I'll read Hebrews 12 and verse 1. Therefore we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. Not only are we provided with all the examples in the Bible, and for example, if you look at the entire chapter of Hebrews 11, right before this conclusion verse in Hebrews 12, verse 1, not only do we have all these examples, but we have each other's examples as well, and we can be witnesses to each other. We can learn from each other's examples of how to better understand how to better handle difficult situations, or how to better serve others. These examples are important to us to show us how to put God's truth into practice in our daily lives. We have the advantage of living in not the world's hugest congregation, and so I think it's fairly easy for us to look around and see opportunities for us to serve one another and to see where there might be a need. And this was particularly the case at camp this year, which was one of the smallest winter camps that they ever had. I believe all said and done, there was only 50 people there. And so it was easy for folks to look around and take the opportunity to see where they could serve one another and see the positive impact that we're able to have on each other by service. And also, maybe we've just been in conversation with one another and heard how others may have handled difficult situations in their lives that give us ideas about how to handle things in our own lives. And this is something that I've certainly encountered as well. Sharing stories and providing modern examples for each other is certainly a way that we can grow in faith and build courage in facing future trials. But I want to take a step back for a minute. How do we actually learn these examples from others? How do we feel comfortable sharing these stories, which may be very personal, with others in a positive and healthy way? And so this leads me to the second idea, which is that another way that we can also work together to build courage is to build camaraderie and build relationships with others who will encourage us and support us as we continue to live God's way. Let's consider the example of Daniel and his 3 friends as they face the trials in Babylon. So I want to examine the passage, not the passage of Daniel's friends in the fiery furnace, but I actually want to examine a different passage where Daniel and his friends were facing the possibility of death because none of the king's wise men could make known to him the interpretation of this dream. And this happens over in Daniel chapter 2. Let's turn over to Daniel chapter 2, and we can see the kind of company that Daniel was keeping in his 3 friends, and how Daniel and his friends helped encourage and inspire one another. So let's turn over to Daniel chapter 2. Daniel chapter 2, and we'll start in verse 16 and read through verse 18. So Daniel went in and asked that the king might give him time, that he might tell the king the interpretation. Then Daniel went to his house and made the decision known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions, that they might seek mercies from the God of heaven concerning this secret, so that Daniel and his companions might not perish with the rest of the wise men in Babylon. Look at the kind of company that Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were keeping. These companions all had the same mission, and they were all seeking God together and seeking his will. These 4 believers went through very difficult trials together in Babylon, and I'm sure they needed each other's companionship to encourage and strengthen each other through life-threatening trials that they faced. Likewise, we too can encourage each other and build friendships that will help support us as we continue persevering against all the trials we face. This is particularly important because, in some regards, how else will we be able to learn from our fellow brethren and their examples if we don't take the time to get to know them and to learn from those examples and to learn what their examples are? If I hadn't gone to camp this year, for example, I wouldn't have known that I got the opportunity to speak at length with Mrs. Solomon, and it turns out that she also has a PhD in, I think, nursing, and she's done all these things that have been very similar to the beginning of my own career, and it's nice to hear from somebody else that things will all work out okay, isn't it? That somebody else has, at least been through something that you have gone through at one point, and that they made it through all right, and they actually have some very helpful advice on how you can help manage different things that happen to you in this career you're going through. And so, for example, if I hadn't taken the time to do that, I never have known. Solomon, I skipped ahead. So, in that regard, we just have to come together, meet together, and really get to know one another so that we can learn from each other and truly encourage one another. So building camaraderie with each other is another way that we can grow in courage as a spiritual family. Now, speaking of King Solomon was aware of the value of working together with like-minded companions and recorded this wisdom for us in Proverbs 27. And I think this is a very good summary of the benefits of working together as a spiritual family. And so this is in Proverbs 27 and verse 17. Proverbs 27 and verse 17, and I'll just read this scripture for you. As iron sharpens iron, so a man sharpens the countenance of his friend. We're all going to need to be as sharp and as strong as possible to build the courage that we need to face the heavy fire that we are under and will continue to be under as Christians in these times. As we face spiritual battles and our role as Christian soldiers, we can see that it's important to work together to grow stronger, as there are unique ways that we can build our spiritual strength that can only be accomplished as a spiritual family, two of which are sharing our examples with one another and building supportive relationships with other members of this spiritual family. Good Sabbath.